All right, joining me now, live in Cairo, Egypt, our man in the Middle East on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Eddie Yeranian. Eddie, good to hear from you.
Thanks for having me, John, as always.
So much in so little time. Give us an update. What happened in Syria? Why are the Israelis mad? Where is it going?
Well, the Israelis are mad because they perceive that Iran is encroaching on their border, getting closer and closer with the Shiite militias that it supports inside of Syria that have been propping up the government of President Bashar al-Assad. They have taken action inside of Syria repeatedly over the last, I guess, maybe since 2015, 3 years. It's somewhat changed the equation in terms of activities inside Syria prior to the revolution, or whatever you want to call it, that started in 2011. They bombed a Syrian, what they claimed was a Syrian nuclear reactor under construction. I think it was in 2007. I was still in Beirut at the time. That was a major event at the time. Today, they've been taking a lot of actions inside of Syria, and no one is saying much of anything. So I think the Syrian government is upset about all the activity inside their airspace. So they reacted. It was the Syrians or the Iranians or both that reacted first by sending an Iranian-built drone inside of Israel. The Israelis, I guess, reacted to that because they're the ones who took action after the drone, and they launched attacks over Syria, conducting a number of them over targets that had to do with the pro-Assad militias, the Iraqi Shiite, Iranian Shiite, Afghan Shiite, whatever militias are on the ground, including Hezbollah. Probably Hezbollah is the most important nemesis that the Israelis face. And after that, someone launched what we believe was a SAM, surface-to-air missile, at an Israeli plane, which then crashed. We've been having a lot of plane crashes recently. I think that's the main thing to take out of all of this. The U.S. media isn't putting two and two together. A lot of these things are probably tied together. There was a Russian plane that crashed maybe a week ago in the north of Syria, I believe, or somewhere in near Idlib, I think. Question as to who gave that surface-to-air missile to the rebel forces on the ground. I think rebel is a generic term these days. One really doesn't know who is doing what. But anyway, there are anti-Assad people on the ground. Some Western media pointed out that type of surface-to-air missile is manufactured in places like Ukraine, Turkey, of course, in Russia as well, and that both the Syrian government, Iraqi government next door have quantities of surface-to-air missiles, so they could have been taken from either of those two governments, in addition to have been supplied by a foreign intelligence agency. Probably they were supplied by a foreign intelligence agency, but it's unclear which one. But in any case, I think one thing you don't see in the American media is that there are approximately 10 intelligence agencies operating in the north of Syria and very, very few journalists. And obviously those intelligence agencies don't want journalists up there. They don't want people seeing what's going on. And I point that out once again because we've been hearing a lot about Assad government alleged gas attacks against the population, the Syrian population. The one we talked about 7 or 8 months ago, I think it is now, I'm fairly certain, 95% certain, was a false flag operation, just judging by the people in the area. And once again, this time around, I have no information whatsoever to say that those are false flag operations, but the mere fact that the same people have been complaining about them leads one to believe that they're just playing political games. Mm-hmm. And I guess there are a lot of political games being played right now. You have to ask yourself what the stakes are in all of this. Some sense in the media that people wanted to put through gas and oil pipelines through the north of Syria from the Gulf. It looks difficult to do at this point, so one would ask oneself why they'd still be pursuing these activities. Who wants what? It's not entirely clear. There definitely are oil and gas resources under the Syrian soil in the east of the country. Some perception that Western governments would like to cut off the east and the north of the country for whatever reasons, which we can't specify with any certainty, but perhaps deal with either a pipeline or oil and gas resources. But in any case, above and beyond all that, we have the specter of a regional war. If you bring down Russian planes, Israeli planes, people have also brought down a Turkish helicopter in the north of Syria about 3-4 days ago. Unclear who supplied the missile that brought that down. A Russian civilian airliner crashed outside of Moscow. I don't know if that's related to this. You never can tell, and no way we're going to prove it ever. But my suspicions went out as to what happened there. There was also a Russian plane carrying the Russian orchestra that was heading to Syria about 2 years ago, I think. We never learned what caused that crash, so we'll probably not learn what caused this crash. But, a lot of these crashes could involve terrorism or intelligence agency operations, and we'll probably never know what actually happened. But in any case, a lot of planes have been crashing. A lot of countries have been clashing. You've got 10 intelligence agencies operating in Syria, and everyone seems to have a stake in what's going on there, but we don't hear in the media what those stakes are because they apparently don't want to tell us.
Well, Eddie Yeranian live from Cairo on the John Fredericks Show. Look, you're never going to get anything accurate out of the Russian Federation government, all right? So that kind of goes without saying. That's why some of these planes that have been shot down, we don't know if it was terrorists. They wouldn't tell you anyway. That's how they operate. But you got to ask yourself this, okay? Where is this headed? And why are we still supplying the rebels, who you just said you don't even know who they are? Assad seems to be gaining ground. There is zero chance. Wouldn't you agree with me now that there is zero chance of Assad being overthrown militarily?
Well, John, there's never zero chance. There was a bomb that went off during a meeting of top Syrian leaders maybe 5 or 6 years ago that took out Assad's top general.
Right.
He was allegedly supposed to be arriving. So you never know if something like that happens. But in terms of a military defeat, that's very remote at this point. Unless Israel bombs the presidential palace in retaliation for this plane, I doubt they would do that. I don't think that that's in the cards, but of course you never know. This is escalating dangerously. And one never thought that we'd get to the point where we are right now because all of these parties should have backed down a long time ago before they set the whole place on fire. Whatever their strategic interests are, I can't imagine that any of their interests have been served by this 6 or 7 year conflict, which has been spilling refugees all over the world, all over the globe, unless that was their strategy from the outset, that they wanted to spill refugees over the globe. I say that just in passing because you never know. The Muslim Brotherhood has apparently been deliberately spilling refugees into Europe from Libya, and Mr. Erdogan in Turkey, I question if he hasn't been doing that on purpose, just to send a lot of refugees into Europe. You never know. And of course, the Council on Foreign Relations, the chap who runs that, has written a book called, I'm trying to remember the exact title, about, what is it, I can't remember, about the world being in disorder. But I mean, the world being in disorder, if you go create disorder and then complain about it, you have to ask yourself what the goals of the people creating the disorder actually are. I mean, why are they creating disorder? Do they want to create disorder?
Yes. I mean, obviously they do. You look at what's going on. And let me just ask you something. I got a text here from Sean in Newport News. Great question. He says, ask Eddie Yeranian, how has our involvement in Syria changed since President Trump took office, in your judgment?
I think President Trump has decided not to support the rebels, other than the fact that some of his military people probably still are, and the intelligence people, which have been battling President Trump from the outset, probably still are. If they are not, they probably have allies in the European intelligence services who are. So there's a limit to what President Trump can control in terms of strategy in Syria. But he's obviously changed the strategy. He's changed it in Libya as well. But we continue to see in the U.S. media, the mainstream media, reports that President Trump should be supporting the Islamists in Libya. I mean, they don't phrase it that way, but ultimately what they're saying is he should be supporting the Islamists in Tripoli rather than General Haftar in the east. And General Haftar was a CIA man supported by the CIA up until a few years ago. So I don't know why on earth we'd be supporting the Islamists in Tripoli rather than General Haftar. You have to ask yourself that question without passing any judgment. But anyway, a lot of things going on beneath the surface. As I said, 10 intelligence agencies operating in Syria. God knows how many are operating in Libya. They've been fighting each other, fighting governments like Egypt. You've got Gulf countries like Qatar, which have been supporting these people in Libya, which are fighting Egypt. So a lot of countries fighting each other under the guise of militias, under the guise of liberation groups, under the guise of terrorists. Who knows who's behind some of these terrorists? I'll venture a bet that some very reputable governments are behind some of these terrorists without naming them. So a lot of ugly things going on, and it all boils down basically to oil and gas. And just a couple days ago, the Turkish government expressed its upset over the fact that Cyprus was exploring gas off its coast, and they tried to stop the Cypriots from doing that. And a lot of these gas resources off the coast are shared by multiple countries because of the boundaries that have been drawn in recent years. And just imagine all those resources under the ground inside of Syria and Iraq and what would be Kurdistan, assuming there's an independent Kurdish region either in Iraq or Syria. So a lot of it boils down basically to oil and gas, and you don't read about that in the U.S. media. So you have to ask yourself if those people in the U.S. media aren't in some way trying to withhold what's going on, and then that leads to even bigger questions, which probably I have no place asking.
Well, I tell you what, this beat here goes on. And you're right. I mean, his change in Syria has been very subtle. He's not made like a proclamation that we're withdrawing. He just isn't putting any more resources in it. But as you say, we still have assets there. We still have intel from other countries. I mean, there's still this European vision of somehow ousting Assad, which if you just look at the math, he's gaining ground. And again, we don't even know who the rebels are, whose side they're on, how they're getting supplied. The whole thing is a mess. We should never have been there from day one. Eddie, as you know, I've been saying that from the very beginning. We had no business being there. We still can't figure out what the end game is. And, now we've got the Israelis involved, and it becomes a very untenable situation. Now, the Israelis rattling the sabers, talking about preemptive strikes. Do you see that on the horizon?
Well, they've been conducting preemptive strikes all along. They were very upset by the fact that Hezbollah has been able to get closer to their border on the Golan Heights, which, of course, internationally are recognized as the occupied Golan Heights. But the Hezbollah is near their border in southern Lebanon. They've been building a border fence there. They've been conducting their strikes over various targets in and around Damascus, as well as a research center in Latakia periodically during the last 2 years. So there's nothing new about it other than the fact that the Syrians and possibly the Russians have responded with this drone action. I'm not sure that the Russians were involved, probably just the Iranians and the Syrians themselves. And, their strategic issue is with Hezbollah getting closer to their border. I don't know that that's really the case other than near the Golan Heights. And I don't know that Hezbollah is actually doing anything to disrupt the status quo. But certainly on paper, it looks disquieting. And I probably would be disquieted if I were sitting in the war room in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv as well. So it's possible that a conflict breaks out between Iran and Israel. We hope it doesn't. The Iranians launched a cruise missile that landed somewhere in Jordan. I think they were aiming it for Israel. This is about maybe 4 or 5 months ago. I can't remember exactly when. We mentioned it at the time. It didn't hit, so I mean, it didn't set off it didn't have any political ramifications, but I think they were trying to tell the Israelis that they could do it if they want with all these ballistic missiles they've been developing over the last 15, 20 years. So this could morph into a regional and possibly worse conflict, assuming one hopes doesn't happen, that the Russians get involved in a conflict in the area. And President Putin has been he hasn't been trigger happy, that's for sure. So I guess I would give him credit for trying to avoid conflicts on the ground, especially after this last plane came down and after the one the Turkish government shot down maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, 2015. So this could get ugly in very short notice. Of course, we hope it doesn't.
Eddie Yeranian, live in Cairo. He's the CBS correspondent there, also our man in the Middle East on the John Fredericks Radio Network. Eddie, thanks for being with us, man. Great update. Thank you so much. Very insightful. Eddie Yeranian, always a pleasure. So, coming up here in a couple of minutes, former Governor Jim Gilmore. We're going to have to hear what he has to say about Mark Warner's text. John Whitbeck right after that. There's a flack going on in Fairfax County with a state central member who obviously is an anti-Semite. We're going to get John's reaction to that. And then Dave Bratt, 8:05, right here on the John Fredericks Radio Network.